Today, few deny the existence of global warming. The poles are melting, the sea level is rising. Researchers warn that the Earth's average temperature could rise between 2 and 3 degrees in the next 50 years. UN reports on this topic say that since 2008, there have been 25.3 million people have displaced every year because of climate change. And we have to see things as a whole. The reduction of biodiversity, the recent pollution of water and air, the glaciers withdrawal, desertification, the reduction of forests, increase of diseases in some places of the world, displacement of populations has created new geopolitics, or how can climate change affect political conditions? Climate change, reconfiguration of the geopolitical map. This is our critical move today. We will look at last events and actors involved. Last February 25, in his speech opening the 40th Human Rights Council of the United Nations, Antonio Guterres said he was concerned about climate change that exacerbates hunger. The effect is dramatic on marginalized and vulnerable people. And he said he would convoke a summit for next September 27th, and the support of politicians will be essential, and all society. Some days before, he said this: I think that the climate risk is the most important systemic change. I think we are losing the race. Climate change is happening faster than we thought, and we have this paradox. Reality is proving that it is worse than what scientists predicted, and all indicators show this. We are dramatically moving towards climate change if we are unable to stop it. At the same time, I see that the political will is stopping. The most important nations, Russia, China, and the United States, have not been, is not functional. This is not good for the economy or for many political aspects. Let's go to the main agreements that include the specific conventions. The UN Framework Convention on Climate Change is the main international agreement on action about climate. It was one of the 3 conventions adopted in the Earth Summit in Rio 1992. Until now, it has been ratified by 195 countries. It was created to stop the world temperature climate change and confront its consequences. Framework Convention of the United States in 1997 includes legally mandatory goals for a developed country. January 1st of 2013, a commitment start with 38 developed countries, including the 28 of the European Union. The United States is still in the developed classification, but did not sign. Canada withdrew before the end of the first period, and this period belongs to the Doha Agreement that promises to reduce levels before the Framework Convention 1997. The Paris Agreement, December 12, 2015, after the conference, became effective in November 2016, that is 1 year later, after the conditions of ratification were gathered by at least 55 countries that represent 55% of the world greenhouse gas emissions. This is As an additional data, more than 70 countries included in the classification of developed and developing countries. They had mandatory commitments to reduce their greenhouse gas emissions. I will now go to Nodal Agency that has an article written by Ulises Loyola Rodriguez, researcher, called Brazil, Bolsonaro a threat to the Amazon, and says that the Amazon is threatened by agribusiness after Jair Bolsonaro came to office. This was published before we knew that Bolsonaro was going to win. Bolsonaro appointed Teresa Cristina as the Minister of Agriculture. This parliamentary group, supported by agribusiness corporations, has started several initiatives in Congress, including the use of agrotoxic agents, transgenic agents, exploitation of protected land in the Amazon, and which threatens the preservation of biodiversity and especially the indigenous communities living there. I now turn to Sputnik. On March 6, 2019, published what climate weapons exist today and how can they be used. The director of the Russian Meteorological System explained that humanity has learned to influence on the clouds and provoke rain or hail in order, for example, to guarantee sun in specific moments or favor agriculture. But he says that capacity, rainmaking capacity, could also cause regional problems because one country could deem that its neighbor is assaulting it without rain. We do have weapons, but they are not used until one state uses it without damaging its neighbors. Russia is a main actor in these matters, and Hansel Oro will tell us more about this issue. Greetings for you and our viewers. Russia is among the 5 larger greenhouse emission states around the world, with 55%. Russian President Vladimir Putin declared before both chambers and talked about the need to address the problem and seek a strategy for ecological welfare. Putin was talking about the use of clean methodologies in many companies that are currently affecting the surrounding and especially the environment. He talked about resucking the rates and eliminate dumps around residential zones. In the case of Moscow, the mayor of this capital referred to the need to seek a change of fuel buses into electrical buses by 2021. Russia has a tradition of more than 100 years in the production of gas, but they are also producing electrical cars and trucks with last inventions, including this UV4 car that has a capacity of 50 kilowatts and to increase speed to 80 kilometers per hour. From the economic point of view, disadvantages could reach climate change. The idea is to take advantage of the northern route, which is in the goal of China and other countries of SEA. It is also important to use agriculture, especially around Siberian forests, Science Academy of Russia is planning to increase food productivity around that forest. According to investigations of the Ministry of Agriculture, however, with climate change, this could mean losing 1 to 2% of Russia's GDP. But with existing technology, they could use things to avoid climate change. Therefore, the need for the U.S. president of ratifying the Paris Agreement that was executed by Russia and 194 countries in the Paris Agreement in order to avoid the greenhouse gas issuance rising. This undoubtedly is part of the policies that Russia has been introducing gradually in order to contribute to adapt both to climate change and also control greenhouse gas emission. Thank you, Hansel, for this information. What geopolitics does climate change generate? What are the geopolitical effects of the climate change and global warming? We will analyze this after our first pause. Climate change, reconfiguration of the geopolitical map. This is our critical move today. According to the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change, we were mentioning at the beginning, the main international agreement on climate refers as climate change, a change of climate directly or indirectly attributed or imputed to human activities on the world atmosphere, and the variability of climate observed within comparable periods of time. And greenhouse effect is the phenomenon that allows part of the energy issued by the land to be transmitted to the space, which will prevent life. And this, the CO2 and methane emission that is creating a global warming. Let's go to context and then analyze. The adaptation capacity of the countries is closely linked with its economic power. This is why climate change brings social inequality. Ban Ki-moon in 1997 was the first to talk about climate war and conflicts generated in global warming. He talked about that food disputes in the province of Sudan, where the people were victims of several droughts and had to go to the south. Nevertheless, several sub-Saharan peoples confronted them. Economists deemed that the rise of waters and therefore the price of foods affect especially sub-Saharan desert and the poorest countries. In the last years, Chinese authorities have become aware not only for global environmental matters, but because it affects that country. China is one of the first nations that has related this problem with its cities. Today, more than 60% of the population lives in cities. Things are so severe that titles like the 10 cities that have their days, the last days because of the rise of the sea, are published. Several zones are in risk, and islands are particularly in the list of threatened places. In 2017, United Nations proposed a climate statute. They foresee that in 50 years, at least 5 countries will disappear. Vanuatu, composed by 28 islands of volcanic origin, around 1,000 kilometers down from northeast of Australia. Kiribati, with 1,200 square kilometers, with 200,000 people. And every year, the sea rises 1 centimeter and the temperature rises 1 degree. Kiribati has 10,000 people that perhaps will have no home soon because the ocean is their main threat. There is no other place that rises more than 2 meters above sea level. Maldives Indians, a country under the world, and that does not help if the sea level rises. We can imagine the risk they are living. On average, the increase is 8 millimeters. Nauru is an island, the smallest of the nation of the world, that has 21.3 square kilometers, and it is divided with almost a little more than 1,100,000 people. In that nation, its inhabitants not only have several diseases, but are threatened to disappear because of the rise of the sea. And the last of the list is Solomon Islands, composed of more than 990 islands, and have 642,000 people. Since the United States, we have Javier Sierra, spokesman of Sierra Club Environmental Organization, and Patricio Rodrigo of Chile Ambiente, expert in all these topics. From Chile. It's a pleasure to have you here. I would like to start with Javier Sierra. Have the climate change and global warming determined specific policies? What effects do you see from this reality? The risks. I don't state risks. It's just what scientists tell us. For example, the Himalaya mountain range provides water to 2.5 billion people. All rivers of the Southeast Asia drink there. And as we see, the glaciers are withdrawing in Himalayas at very fast rates. We're talking about 2.5 billion people. These people cannot remain at home if the climate weather reaches the points that United Nations talks about. But if this happens, these people are not going to stay home waiting to die. They will displace, emigrate to to places where they can survive. And we're talking about Himalaya, not, or I know this is going to talk about a study made outside that tells us that if we don't take measures soon, if we don't reduce fossil emissions drastically, the United States risks to lose around $4.4 billion every year in agriculture, manufacturing, etc., and several zones of the United States would be uninhabitable. For example, half of the Florida Peninsula would be completely flooded, many parts of the Gulf of Mexico, even here where we live. So, if there would be a realignment in a country that could do this perfectly. There are parts of the world that are more vulnerable than others. I incorporate Patricio. The Arctic region has become 3 times warmer than the rest. There are the great deltas, cities like Shanghai, Calcutta, and Dhaka. These also includes islands that are highly vulnerable, and also the scarcity of water and the harvests that will not be able to be harvested. The crops. I would like to ask you to have I would like to ask you about the most vulnerable zones. Good morning, Lucia, Javier. Undoubtedly, the climate change is the great problem that the world has today, and that has been caused by human beings. And there are many countries that are more vulnerable because of the rise of the ocean, but also many countries of dry and semi-dry areas, because of the exhaustion of hydric resources, are in serious problems. We mustn't forget that 7 years behind as a result of a drought caused migration. And the migrations were the first revolts of what we are living until now. Of course, the intervention of the powers to take over the resources that are left behind. So climate change is produced by human rights, by human beings, and that is the cause of this great world problem. The situation of climate change is a wrong development model, a consumerist model where they only care about individual welfare and lots of contamination to the environment, where they are interested in sustainable growth. And in this way, we should say that it is not unsustainable. These will cause future problems because this will change the world map, and it could even cause the alteration of sea streams in a medium term. A good part of continents, especially in the north, would remain under ice as a result of the climate change. So this has unpredictable effects that the world have not considered. We are not in the Paris Agreement, where the goals were moderate. It was passed unanimously, but many countries until this day deny climate change, laugh about it, even if their countries are also affected. We need the communities to become aware that climate change is a political problem. So we're going to have to change political leadership with cultural leadership that understands that the world is not a dichotomy, society and economy. It's not a dialectic problem, but they think nature is not only a matter of rights, but it sets the limits to growth. You have your profitability most time. Today, agreements are enough. We referred to the beginning, we listed the framework instruments. Have obligations been divided equitably?
Javier nos habrá escuchado. Javier, le repito la pregunta. Por si es que nos ha fallado la conexión, si hoy los acuerdos son suficientes, si alcanzan esos instrumentos marco que están vigentes y si las obligaciones o los deberes han sido repartidos equitativamente.
Of course not. This has not happened, and when we saw Poland in the last climate change, UN climate change meeting, and we see that in several cases it has been conducted by the United States, and we see there is resistance against the measures we have to take. What is clear that some admitted in some part of last week to admit climate change emissions in 40% or totally, because oil, carbon and natural gas combustion must be reduced at least at 50%. And these are the goals that we are watching in the United States because of this obstacle that the only administration in all the world that denies climate change refuses to comply with the rules. But we cannot be sending terrifying and negative messages to the community. In the United States, there are communities that have promised to consume only liquid economy in the world, because any state of the United States or any institution, not only California but also Hawaii, there's more than 100 cities that are committed to the future. They have reduced in more than half the carbon combustion plants. That is one of the main contaminants. And by 2030, practically all carbon combustion plants will be closed. But this is also something important. We cannot leave emerging countries like, for example, the Latin American integration to talk about the most because they have contributed more to that region. So we must set a commitment in order to resist extreme weather that climate change brings, and also share resources and technological knowledge for them to reach clean energy and renewable energy. And this is our obligation. Thank you very much, Javier y Patricio. Thanks to our guests. We were talking about actors, and we'd like to talk about decisive countries and if there is enough will, because great United States, the European Union, and China and Russia are among the countries that are the most Climate change and global warming, geopolitical effects, perhaps it's a new configuration of the world political map. According to studies of global warming, China is the main green gas emission creator in the United States, while the United States is the greater per capita issuer. This country is highly intensive in greenhouse gas emission. None of these two countries, there are only two countries that comply with the UN, which is Bhutan and Costa Rica, but none of these have any power among the world. At present, the average global temperature has increased almost 2 degrees regarding the Industrial Revolution. Asia is the most threatened continent with this problem, and the United States has high risk with 25 million people living in highly threatened areas. Latin America and Caribbean will be highly affected because of its dependence on agricultural exports. This contributes to 5% of the region's GDP, 23% of regional exports. Bolivia, Ecuador, El Salvador, Honduras, Nicaragua, and Paraguay would be the most damaged. We now have information on Venezuela, last hour information from Venezuela, where they report the re-establishment of electricity after the generation distribution system was sabotaged in the afternoon of last yesterday. This has been informed by the authorities from Caracas, and this re-establishment is progressive, gradual in Venezuela after the sabotage denounced by authorities. Well, let's keep deepening our critical move on climate change. We have Jorge Saturno, researcher in atmospheric weathers, climate change involved in air quality studies in Brazil, Venezuela, and Germany. And I think you also have experience in instruments measuring particles suspended in the atmosphere. Welcome to Critical Move. Jorge, for a new energy model, of course, you need new ways of energy. This creates disputes, new disputes around the world? Yes, of course. New energy level, for example, solar energy, you need heavy metals that at this time are found only in Africa and South America. The access to these resources will define the future conflicts. There are great powers that would like to have more control upon our territories. Before the pause, I was asking if there's enough political will, because scientists have given the voice of alert several times, but it seems that some heads of state neglect these warnings. And is there political will? That's why I repeat the question. There is the political will of both sides, both to resolve problems and political will to boycott the solutions. For example, the new government of Bolsonaro in Brazil came out from a crisis and is against any environmental solution. And in fact, he has proposed to plant the Amazon with agribusiness. So there are also political wills of change to resolve climate and environmental problems, but there's also a political will against it. A struggle that is around the global environmental topic. In 2009, a businessman signed an announcement that was published in the New York Times, where He asked Barack Obama to defend significant and effective measures to combat climate change and adopt any amendments necessary to protect the humanity. His senior children were also signing that letter. In 2012, contrarily, he said many times it's a deceit of China to affect the United States. Then he said he didn't say that, and in a 2016 interview, he said that he did not believe man had contributed to climate change. Finally, in July 2017, he announced the United States leaving the Paris Agreement. And this was all with some kind of mockery. So is this a scientist ignorance? How do you see this? Well, the United States is an example of transnational lobbying, handling. Donald Trump has been supported by certain lobbying, including the lobbying of the oil and fossil fuel sectors. And one of the goals is to lower the tone on climate change and create scenario to stop any initiative of change in energy revolution to cleaner sources. There are countries that risk disappearing or remaining underwater. What political consequences will this have? One of the main consequences is displacement of populations, and the Middle East will be affected not by being under the water but by high temperatures. A recent study said that the average hottest days will increase, and this means displacement of millions of people, perhaps to Europe, which is most probable. When I talked about mockery or irony, it was last year when President Trump said that global warming would be good for some in the United States to combat the low temperatures that reach 40 degrees centigrade. And many said this was a provocation to create opinion. Is the planet in danger with this? I think it is. I think we are in a non-return situation. Trump's mockery is ridiculous. For example, this winter when they mocked that where's climate change because it's a displacement of the Arctic Gulf, and this is a consequence of climate change. So it's ironic to mock this when the people are living the consequences. There's also the uncontrolled exploitation of certain resources. It's one of the things we have to stop from now. Countries who depend on fossil fuels must start seeking for alternatives and seek for alternatives. And it must be people who are neutral in this topic. When we look at the studies, we see that it's a chain of independent elements because to reduce greenhouse gas effects, the use of fossil fuels includes changing the ways of production that the capitalistic system imposes. So I was remembering that Chávez said it once in Copenhagen, COP15 in December 2019, a phrase that was very famous. Let's change the system, said President Chávez since then. And we said we're going to read that audience. But he said the problem, the root problem in capitalism is that, yes, we are living in a hegemonic extractivist system, pillage. And we necessarily have to change that, not only the consumerist way of life, but also to try to share technology globally, because the metropolitan countries control technology and do not allow emerging countries to develop their own alternatives, to help them solve this global anti-metric problem. You said that pillage, and at the midterm, it doesn't seem that pillage geopolitics will stop. No, in fact, if you look at the amount of mining projects in Latin America, actives are 168, of which 155 are in conflict. That extractivist hegemony continues controlling politics in our continent. Only in our continent. Yes, let's not mention Africa, where conflicts are worse. What are the risks for Africa? One of the most surprising risks of Congo is one of the highest in the world. For example, they are promoting the use of the electric car. Every battery for more than 120 kilograms of cobalt they will continue in conflict because the demand will be reproduced 5 times. And if they continue producing vehicles in Europe and the United States. Now, actors that are definitive are the United States, Russia, India, and those of the Community Forum. Yes, mainly United States, China, and Japan control the access to materials. I have a quote from Chavez in 2009 in COP15 of Copenhagen on climate change. He said the scientifically sustainable goal of reducing contaminated issuance at all lights today at this time seem to have failed until now. We have no doubt on the reason the irresponsible and most powerful nations of the world. I say with irresponsible marches, exclusion against an elite management of something that we could all resolve. Are the richest those who are damaging the country? Yes, it is they who issue the highest amounts of greenhouse gas emissions. And technological transfer, as I said, is very important, because while they control technology, we will not be able to propose real alternatives to solve this problem. And global warming definitely will change borders, even the course of waters. It could create new routes. The Arctic, for example, would open many commercial interests. The South Pole as well, because not because of routes, but the access to minerals. They estimate that there will be much access, and this is within the Antarctic Agreement, where the nations do not have the borders clear. Thank you very much. After so much investigation, I don't know if you want to add something. I would like to say that the most powerful nations are proposing the planet's geoengineering, changing the planet to try to resolve the problem, which will have unimaginable collateral effects. So we, as peripheral nations, must propose natural solutions and stop disturbing the Earth system. Thank you very much for being here. Your intervention has been very valuable. Let's go to our conclusions. Global warming is an increase in time of land and water temperature that risks human life. In January 2018, experts on climate change of the United Nations published a report where they assured that the increase of temperature in 1.5 in 2100 will contribute to reduce between 70 and 90%. This is not small. To reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 2050, unprecedented changes must be made in society, in our activity, our human life. Some ideas of our guest, Jorge Sarturno, the geopolitics of pillage, extractivism, geoengineering of the planet is something we must avoid. Thank you very much for being here with us, and continue with Latin America and Symphony.
Gracias, Jorge.